efforts to address the deficiencies in barracks identified by the GAO. Investing in facilities and infrastructure is critical to supporting our soldiers and their families. These investments directly impact the way our soldiers train, sleep, eat, take care of their families. High-quality infrastructure is a bedrock of the quality of life for our Army families and directly impacts military readiness. Now I'll recognize Ms. Wasserman Schultz for her opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate you yielding. Assistant Secretary Jacobson and Lieutenant General Vereen, thank you so much for being here once again to testify. It's good to see you both. I think you probably realize this is going to be a bit of a tough year for us. We're in the second year of spending caps that were set in place by the Fiscal Responsibility Act, and so we are going to have an especially tight decision-making process that we go through. The top line spending level for defense programs is barely a 1% increase over last year's level, so this year's budget request really shines a light on what's important to the Army. In total, the Department of Army is requesting $3.7 billion for military construction for the Army, Army National Guard, Army Reserve, and Family Housing Operations and Construction. And that's a $185 million increase over last year's enacted level, and importantly, an increase of $1 billion over last year's budget request. Year after year, we press the services in this subcommittee to submit adequate budget requests, and while I know that there's certainly much more work that we can do, it's good to see us trending in the right direction. That's not the case with every one of our hearings, so I'm really pleased to see that the Army is prioritizing its soldiers and families. The Army's requested almost $1 billion to construct new barracks and $101 million for new family housing construction, which is especially meaningful in a year when flat budgets feel like a win. The condition of Army barracks has been deplorable, and the Government Accountability Office highlighted just how bad they can be in a report issued in September of 2023. There is still a long way to go to right the ship, but seeing the Army taking this seriously and submitting a budget that strongly invests in the quality of housing for our soldiers is heartening. This is progress that I expect the Army will continue to build upon in future budget requests as well. Military construction supports installations and facilities to support the warfighter, but that's more than just missile and munitions, distribution facilities, hangars, and ranges. It's also the facilities that support the whole person and their family to ensure a quality of life that we promise. Sexual assault is still rampant across all the services. The Army saw a decrease in reports of sexual assaults in 2022 by about 9% compared to the year before, which is the most recent year we have statistics. And I'm wondering whether that's because the Army is doing a better job of preventing assaults or because fewer soldiers are comfortable reporting. If soldiers are expected to give their full attention to training and warfighting, they can't be worried about whether or not their children have safe and reliable childcare either. How is the Army meeting the needs of its families, providing safe and reliable childcare, and ensuring CDC facilities are being adequately prioritized? Beyond just the infrastructure necessary for adequate childcare, we also have to ensure the safety of the children served at those CDCs. There were recently deeply troubling reports about child abuse at a Navy CDC and leadership failures that resulted in unacceptable delays in families getting answers. The safety of our children is the most important thing, and I think we can all agree on that. And we need to ensure our troops can trust the services to care for their family members and keep them safe from harm. On the housing front, privatized family housing has a terrible history of unlivable housing conditions, and with past instances of fraud from the housing providers to boot, it is imperative that we continue to do more to hold private companies accountable and ensure all housing that DoD oversees is clean, livable, and safe. They make rounding error decisions that are a cost of doing business for them, both in terms of the fraud that they've committed and the neglect that they have perpetrated on our military service members and their families when it comes to the utter disregard for the care for their facilities that they're responsible for. Now, hearing that the services want to double down on this effort to use privatization as a means to solve its unaccompanied housing issues is not something that we're taking lightly. I approach this with deep skepticism. These proposals need to be seriously scrutinized to make sure that we don't repeat the same mistakes of the past. Privatization of unaccompanied housing might end up being the right answer in some limited circumstances, but it should not be the first and only option considered to right-size our unaccompanied housing portfolio. And I'm interested in hearing how and why the Army is considering this solution. And lastly, we must continue to focus on environmental cleanup. I've prioritized funding in this bill over a number of years now for PFAS remediation because of how widespread and harmful these chemicals are. We must do right by our affected communities to ensure BRAC installations are not harming water quality in the surrounding area. To that point, EPA announced its final rule earlier this month that sets a national standard for PFAS contamination in drinking water. This not only emphasizes the seriousness of this issue, but it will also undoubtedly increase the Army's PFAS funding needs. I'm interested in the Army's plan for remediation moving forward. So we have a lot of important issues to discuss today. Thank you again for being here, and I look forward to your testimonies. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Wasserman Schultz. Thank you both for taking the time to be here. Without objection, your written statements will be entered into the record. Please summarize your remarks in about 5 minutes each. We'll start with Ms. Jacobson.
Is that now? Okay.
There you go.
Thank you, Chairman Carter and Ranking Member Wasserman Schultz and distinguished members of the subcommittee for inviting us to present the Army's fiscal year 2025 budget request for military construction and housing. The readiness and resiliency of our force starts with high-quality places to work and live for our soldiers and families. We thank you for funding Army MILCON projects in the 2024 Appropriations Bill. Our 2025 budget request will build on these important investments. The Army's 2025 budget request in MILCON will fund 45 projects across the active Army, the Guard, and the Reserves. From 9 new barracks buildings to 4 child and youth centers, our 2025 MILCON projects will improve soldiers' and families' quality of life. Our budget request also includes important investments in operational facilities, including the organic industrial base, that are critical to ensuring our soldiers are well-trained, equipped, and ready to defend our nation. Much of the infrastructure supporting our installations is aging and in need of upgrades. Along with water and energy conservation and community partnerships, the Army's 2025 budget request promotes infrastructure resiliency both on and off base. The backlog of deferred maintenance for Army's sizable building inventory grew over the course of many years for many reasons. This deferred maintenance has consequences, as we have seen with Barracks. We take very seriously the recommendations in the GAO Barracks report, the Barracks-related provisions of the 24 NDAA, and the recent recommendations of the House Quality of Life panel. Any increase in poor and failing barracks for any reason must be reversed, and barracks that are in good condition must remain that way. That is why the Army is requesting 100% of the funding required for sustainment of all barracks. The Army is taking a number of steps to improve the soldier experience in new and renovated barracks by creating better living quarters and communal spaces. The Army is also improving our business practices. Working with the Army Corps, we will ensure design is sufficiently complete and that cost estimates reflect rigorous analysis before we request funding for MILCON projects. This will give both the Army and Congress more predictability in our budgetary needs. Similarly, the Army is improving our building management systems to better see the status of our facilities and manage needed repairs. We are also working to ensure our data is accurate and reliable. To build ready installations of tomorrow, we must modernize how we construct and operate our buildings. It is important to evaluate during the design phase of a building how it will function efficiently through its entire life cycle. For example, a building's proposed location can determine environmental risks, such as flooding. Installing more efficient systems can decrease future utility bills. Constructing with more durable materials will create longer-lasting buildings and reduce maintenance costs. Careful upfront planning will make our buildings more resilient and ready to support the Army of the future. We must also ensure that contamination emanating from our installations does not pose health risks to anyone, either on or off base. The Army appreciates the recent actions taken by EPA to impose regulatory standards for PFAS, and we stand ready to comply. Through these 2025 investments, the Army is looking to improve soldiers' quality of life and operational effectiveness. We look forward to working with Congress to build and maintain the installations of the future. Thank you. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Ms. Jacobson. Let's have Lieutenant General Vereen talk now.
Chairman Carter, Ranking Member Wasserman Schultz, distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to speak about the Army's fiscal year 25 military construction budget request. And thank you for your continued support to our Army soldiers, families, and civilians. The Army's investments in quality of life are critical for the readiness of the total force and our ability to retain and recruit the best of our nation. Investing in soldier barracks, family housing, childcare, and spouse employment enables readiness because soldiers can focus on their mission. Our requested barracks funding is now an average of $2.1 billion across all components of the Army, and we have requested 100% of the sustainment requirement for all barracks types in the operations and maintenance account. We are also implementing new processes to improve our costs to complete for MILCON projects. By involving the U.S. Corps of Engineers and the garrison commanders earlier in the process, we can provide more accurate costs. How we invest in barracks to ensure the safety, health, and well-being of our residents demonstrates our commitment to the most basic needs of our soldiers and their families. We recruit soldiers, but we retain families, which is why the Army continues to make significant progress to provide high-quality family housing. This budget requests $752 million for the operation, maintenance, leasing, privatization, oversight, and construction for Army family housing worldwide, and also includes investments in Army-controlled family housing. Privatized housing providers will invest over $2.5 billion in new construction, renovations, and other development work. When it comes to Army families, investing in the access to affordable childcare also makes a difference in supporting a soldier's ability to serve. Thank you for funding 8 new child development centers from fiscal year 21 through 24, renovating 11 child development centers and 12 more in fiscal year 24. This budget request includes $174 million for 3 child care development centers and 1 youth center. This also includes the Fort Liberty Child Care Development Center, which we would like to thank you for pulling it forward. We also continue to support our spouse employment opportunities. We have implemented and supported many initiatives to help spouses maintain their professional careers. We know that spouse unemployment can lead to potential financial strain with Army life and lead to retention decisions. Thank you for your efforts to expand the scope and licensure reimbursement with 38 states. When we can provide critical support to professional spouses and enable them to continue meaningful careers throughout multiple PCS moves, we also enable that family to continue their commitment to the Army. The strength of our Army is our soldiers, and the strength of our soldiers are our families. This budget request is an investment in the well-being and the readiness of our soldiers and families. I look forward to answering your questions. Thank you.
Thank you both for your statements. As we begin our questions, I'd like to remind our members that we will follow the usual hearing procedures. Those that I shared with you at the ahead of the first meeting we had last month. And I guess I will begin. I strongly believe that the Army's role in the Indo-Pacific and I think the need to invest in that region is critical. I made a tour out there, and I saw a lot of things that need fixing. The Army's FY25 budget includes about $300 million in major construction in Hawaii, Alaska, and Japan. The request also includes $75 million in minor construction for the region. Lastly, though there is no funding for FY 25 for Guam, there's over $900 million planned for FY 26 and 27. Initial questions that I have are, can you tell us about the Army's military construction priorities in the region? What are the places that need more funding than what is included in FY 25 request?
I'd be happy to start, and then, of course, Lieutenant General Vereen will, of course, supplement and weigh in and tell you everything that I didn't tell you. So we are very focused, Chairman Carter, on the Indo-Pacific. And across our, through our FY 29 program, we will be investing $1.7 billion collectively in the Indo-Pacific. And of course, Guam is still being planned and worked out, so there might be additions with respect to Guam. In Hawaii, there are many examples. We've got Schofield Barracks, water tank projects, water pumping projects. We have an aircraft maintenance hangar at Wheeler Army Airfield. We're doing a lot of integrated resilience planning at Kwajalein, where that's obviously extremely necessary. Going back to Hawaii for 1 second, we stood up a task force specifically to look at infrastructure because the Hawaii infrastructure, both on the water and the electricity side, is in need of repair. And we're so intertwined with the communities in Hawaii, it makes it all that more urgent. So we have a dedicated task force just to help us evaluate and propose and cost out infrastructure projects, of course, in conjunction with the local utilities. We're also investing in Alaska. We have a programmed project in the FY 25 for a machine gun range, and as well as at Wainwright, as well as Barracks for FY 26. So huge focus on the Indo-Pacific. Some of my colleagues and I will be going to Hawaii and Alaska, both in 1 week.
It'll be quite a trip.
I know. In the week of May 18th, we're heading first to Hawaii and then to Alaska. So just a demonstration of our commitment.
General?
Chairman Carter, just to add to what Honorable Jacobson kind of talked about, we are heavily investing in, I think, the Indo-Pacific. We've, over the last year, I've been able to at least travel to Hawaii, Guam, and Alaska. And so understanding the significance of what that region does for our military and the strategic location, there are quite a bit of investments there. I will just highlight Guam because I think that is, as we continue to build out, that's going to be a very interesting, region, or at least island, because of just the tyranny of distance of trying to get things there. And we're working with OSD, of course, in the sequencing to ensure that the Army's equities are in line with all the other services. We do have a substantial amount of money that we're going to invest in 26 and 27, and most of that is already dedicated to support several of our units there, primarily our air defense unit that's there as well. And so I think we're in good stead with the Pacific, but of course, like you said, there's plenty of work to be done, and we will continue to make sure that the Army is positioned and postured to support whatever happens in that region.
I have a couple of follow-up questions on this subject matter. Will the lack of funding for Guam and the Army request impact the timeline for building out the Army's presence there? Are there any projects on Guam that should be considered in FY 25? If so, we'd like to know about them. Does the Army have the workforce that it needs on Guam? And I've been working on that since I went to Guam. And we've gotten the visas, or we're getting the workers. The Army, how is the Army working with sister services in Indo-Pacific to ensure the right projects are in the right places at the right time? And can you discuss the Army's role in implementing the Indo-Pacific construction pilot program from last year's National Defense Authorization Act? So that's a lot of stuff, but I need to know it.
Chairman Carter, we might want to take some of that for the record so we can give you a fulsome answer, a comprehensive answer. Because of the sequential nature, because of the intra-agency respective roles with at Guam, with, of course, Navy being the lead, the Missile Defense Agency is conducting the NEPA for all the proposed sites where the new equipment will be housed. We're going to be positioning soldiers there, so we're going to focus on the housing needs in particular. I don't know even yet what the status is of the Endangered Species Act consultation. So we're trying to balance all of the prerequisites to the construction needs that we know are going to have to go forward, of course, in conjunction with OSD, Navy, Missile Defense Agency. But we can take that for the record and give you a fulsome report of what we're going to be doing. I think we're having an Army Guam meeting Friday, if I'm not mistaken.
That'd be great. I'd appreciate that.
I would, Chairman Carter, I would just highlight, kind of what Honorable Jacobson said, of course, is sequencing. We're very aware of the challenge, I think, as all the services are really trying to get their equities met. And so we're working with the Navy and, of course, with the Department of Defense to ensure that our equities are met as well. I think we've identified our first set of requirements, and we have funding for those. And so we know what we're going to put in first. And then as we continue to work with the Navy, the housing, to ensure that it's probably going to be joint housing, it's probably going to be all co-located together, where all the services will share, family housing. So I think we have a plan in the long run. And then, of course, there are going to be some significant requirements, funding requirements on the back end of this as we continue to build out. But again, I think we can take a lot of this for the record, and we can give you a little bit more detail.
Well, every place I went over there said, we got money, but we don't have workers. And they recommended we get visas from Philippines. I think they have given some special, how many I don't know, but they've at least given some special visas for Philippines. I mean, I heard this from the military, also heard it from the civilian construction, and civilian people said, now look, we know you got to go military first, but keep them in place so we can finish our streets and all our stuff we've got to do to make this thing work. That needs to be worked out there on Guam. But I hope that the State Department will also be cooperative in these visas. And I was told they would. So let me know about that, because you can't get it done. And it's not that we can't bring people from the United States, continental United States. It's too far away. They won't come. It's just that simple. And plus, there's too much going on in the United States in construction that they don't need to go over there and get it and do it. I think that's enough for me. I'll yield to Ms. Wasserman Schultz.
Thank you. Thank you. The Army's requesting $2.3 billion in FY25, and that's $841 million more than the FY24 budget request. Like I said, it was going in the right direction. And there are significantly more funding requirements for the Army than requested in this year's budget, but just like every year. But I'm really glad to see the trend going the way we have encouraged you, cajoled, pushed you to go, because each year we need to make sure that we're better meeting the needs of the Army and its soldiers, even in a tight fiscal environment. So I'm a big believer in that a budget request shows your values. And it's good to see that the Army is focusing on prioritizing the quality of life for its soldiers and families. So the almost $1 billion requested for the 9 barracks projects between the Army and Army Reserve is a substantial investment to right-size the conditions of Army housing. It was a pretty scathing GAO report that described the horrible condition of Army barracks. That likely led to the request. I hope that it did. But it's good to see that you're taking it head on. I mean, construction funding alone is not going to solve the issues with the Army barracks, and we're going to be in the same place again if the Army doesn't prioritize proper maintenance and oversight of the housing. So, Secretary Jacobson, can you talk to us about how the $1 billion will help the Army improve the condition of the barracks? And then also, is the plan simply to build new barracks instead of updating and fixing the current barracks, or is the number of Army barracks being requested simply indicative of the size of the deficit of barracks spaces?
Ranking Member Wasserman Schultz, I'm so pleased that you recognize our commitment through our budget request, because we obviously took it very seriously, and that budget request reflects a lot of thinking and a lot of strategizing within Army senior leadership about how to best get after this. We are going to use MILCON to address deficit. That is where we literally don't have enough barracks buildings to accommodate soldiers at certain installations for various reasons. It could be there's a mission increase or what have you. But we're going to use the vast majority of our $2.5 billion budget request for restoration and maintenance and 100% sustainment. Through the restoration and maintenance, we hope to restore as many of the so-called Q3, Q4 barracks to bring them into Q1, Q2 condition. And then with the 100% sustainment funding, which is a first in many years, at least for us, to request that, we're going to maintain those Q1, Q2 barracks so they don't fall into disrepair. We are also very cognizant that we have to have civilian managers, not just because the NDAA now requires that we have civilian managers over our barracks, but because it's the right thing to do. So we have the funding in our fiscal year 25 budget for 75 civilian managers. We are completing a manpower study to increase that substantially in future year budget requests to make sure that we have the right ratio of civilian managers to barracks buildings so that soldiers no longer have to do this as a collateral duty. And we're going to also make sure there's accountability. Commanders are going to take much more personal responsibility and oversight over the condition of our barracks. This is going to be continuing. Our base program budgeted $2.1 billion on average going forward, but we'll see that may be subject to change as we continue to assess the conditions.
Thank you. I'd really like to get an idea of what you're doing to address the barracks housing issues now, in addition to building new barracks, because the conditions are horrendous already. So if you can answer that question, how do the new barracks fit into the Army's holistic plan to ensure that every soldier has clean, livable housing? And what's the timeline to get all barracks to a livable standard, and what do you expect that to cost?
Ranking Member Wasserman Schultz, the question you're asking is a good one and an appropriate one, and is also part of the requirements we have in Section 2839 of the 2024 Defense Bill to report specifically on how we're going, what's our 5-year plan for bringing our barracks that are in good condition or bad condition into good condition, and how we're going to keep our barracks in good condition, how we're going to keep them that way. And then again, we're going to try to use MILCON specifically to address deficit where we need to build new barracks. We're also going to select very shortly for FY25, we're going to select a certain number of barracks buildings that are beyond repair, and we're going to use the new authority Congress has given us to replace those barracks instead of repairing them when the cost of repair exceeds 75% cost of replacement. So we have a 1 to N list of the worst to the best. Best we can assess that right now. I mean, a lot of this is modeled. We are also going to, working with the Corps of Engineers, we're going to do a more in-depth inspection of all of our barracks buildings to get a better sense of it. But our approach right now is address the worst first and use the funding that we're requesting in 2025 to fix those barracks first, in addition to the ones we're building.
Okay, and then I just want to touch on the plans or the purported plans to privatize Barracks. Why is privatization the best option? Have you considered other options? And if you are actually already moving forward with privatization of Barracks, what lessons have you learned from the scandals that plagued the privatized housing initiative so that we don't make those mistakes again? And specifically, because we've had hearings on this in this subcommittee and very strong bipartisan support for our concerns. How will the contracts be different this time? And what in the contract specifically will require the private companies to invest in the maintenance of the facilities decades down the road when the projects are no longer new?
The privatized barracks is one option. It is not the solution by any stretch of the imagination.
Not.
And it's not our preferred option. For FY '25, we have a request for we received funding in FY '24, I apologize, to build to enter into a contract for one new privatized barracks at Fort Irwin in California with the Michaels Company. It will be for 544 beds. And Michaels has a track record. They built some privatized barracks for the Navy in San Diego. We're only going to do this, first of all, where the life cycle cost analysis makes clear that it will be more efficient and a cost savings for a privatized company to build and maintain those barracks than for the Army to do so. And also where it makes sense to do so, where the circumstances of the particular installation warrant privatization, particularly at Fort Irwin where there's really no available outside housing. It's a pretty remote location and austere. We felt it makes sense to do so. And again, with a provider that has a track record already. The same Bill of Rights, the same improvements we've made with respect to privatized family housing will apply. We don't yet know the specifics of the contract. We have to work that out. But we have to do so that gives Army leadership and commanders full access and oversight.
The contracts, and just before I yield back, Mr. Chairman, if you remember, I mean, what we learned about the contracts were that they were wound so, the complexity of those contracts were wound so tight that it made it impossible, nearly impossible, for the military services to hold the privatized companies accountable. There was no threat of unwinding. There was no threat of, okay, we're taking back these properties. So I would strongly suggest, and Mr. Chairman, I would suggest that even though this is laying out there only as a possibility, that we put language in our bill that directs the services on how they structure those contracts so that they aren't left to the mercy of the privatized companies years down the road. Thank you. I yield back. Thank you for the indulgence.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for both being here. General, I'll start with you. And I asked the Navy and the Air Force the same thing. I was watching the comments of the commanding general at Fort Bliss. He spent a lot of time talking about that part of the issue in the barracks was the training necessary of some of the young soldiers to make sure that they have discipline and learn how to clean. So a lot of it was basic cleanliness. This is how you do it if you're going to have accommodation. Was that do you think that's an isolated incident, or do you think that is prolific along the force that we need to do a little more training on how to do basic cleaning? Sir.
So, that's a very good question, and I appreciate it. I think first that how the discipline of our soldiers is really taught in basic training, and so it really starts in basic training. And for all of us who who have gone through basic training, understand the long hours of just trying to do general cleanliness, not only just personal cleanliness, but also cleanliness of your living space. So I don't think it's a systemic problem. I think it's probably more of an isolated problem. But I think with instilling and reinforcing why cleanliness is important to readiness, because it is a readiness issue. We want our soldiers to be ready, but coupled with leadership at the first line supervisor level, that's a unit problem to solve, and we are expecting leaders to be involved in daily lives.
Let me follow up on leadership, because I do have some concerns about privatization of barracks and command and control, because cleanliness, conduct, all those things in barracks, and believe me, I've been a commanding officer and I've been through a lot of barracks, lived in them both. You know, having the ability for someone to be in charge and someone to be accountable is incredibly important. Are you concerned about privatization, and if we go forward on these contracts, are you confident that we can write a contract so senior leaders can still maintain control of the barracks?
Congressman, we're absolutely confident that we will be able to do that. I think regardless of how we move forward, and I will be honest with you, I think for the most part, the Army's not on the side of full privatization of our barracks. There's reasons why it doesn't necessarily fit for the Army. Most of our units are force generating units, and the fact that they have to be ready to deploy at a moment's notice and vacate barracks and infrastructure really doesn't bode well for privatization for the Army for the most part. But I do feel confident that we hold folks accountable. We will if we move down that road, and it's about holding our soldiers accountable and leadership accountable to ensure the vitality of our barracks for the long term.
I appreciate it. And Madam Secretary, thank you for your service, by the way. So I know the DOD instruction mandates that we're going to go to all electricity. I get a little concerned about how to do that, since China controls northward of 80% of the critical minerals, batteries, et cetera, et cetera. But first of all, Indochina, how much of your request is for warfighting and how much is for barracks and other amenities? You know, you have to break down without a general breakdown of your request in the Indo-Pacific. How much is it for warfighting capability, installations, hardening, barracks, hardening, fuel supply, those type of things, as opposed to barracks?
In the Indo-Pacific specifically?
Yes.
Well, of course, our request, it reflects the installation needs, the facility needs, military construction needs. So I would have to give you the specifics on that, of a breakdown of all the projects in the Indo-Pacific, and we'd be happy to provide that. But because our request reflects installation of facilities and military construction, I'm guessing it's more towards the installations and facilities and barracks.
Yeah, and we reviewed the Navy's budget too, and I think there's concern that we need ammunition, we need fuel, we need those type of logistics, and our supply chains out of whack in the Pacific. And looking at the request, we want to make sure that our frontline capability to defend this country is not at risk. So I understand the need for great barracks, and believe me, I understand that, but our primary mission is to defend the country, and we want to make sure those requests are made. Lastly is, I understand you're the waiver authority. If they deviate from going to all electricity, you're the waiver authority if they want to design something. And just out of curiosity, have you given any waivers? Have you done a cost analysis of what going all electricity would mean, cost, and looked at metrics for a waiver if you've given one?
Congressman, the waiver authority that is contained in our electrification policy hasn't been exercised yet. I think it's still very new. And of course, this policy tiers off of administration policy and OSD policy, and actually is a requirement under the Energy Independence and Security Act of 2007. So it's all geared toward being prepared for electrification. But the central goal is to reduce consumption and increase readiness, bottom line. And we also are making sure that any electrification, that a prerequisite is a capacity analysis. And so we're engaging in partnerships with the utilities to understand capacity, both on and off base, because of all the demands on the grid. So we're very cognizant that we can't just look at this electrification in isolation. It has to be part of a big picture, and we will consider many different factors if a waiver request is made.
I appreciate that, and I ask you just keep us informed as you go through the process. There's a lot of variables in there, and
Absolutely.
let us know how we can be helpful. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you.
Mr. Bishop.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to extend my heartfelt thanks to the distinguished witnesses, Secretary Jacobson and General Vereen, for your unwavering dedication and service. Your presence is instrumental in our efforts to enhance the quality of life for our service members. Got a couple of questions for you. Given the increased funding allocation for family housing, how will the Army ensure that the allocated funds for family housing are utilized to address the most pressing needs that have been identified by military families? And how does the Army plan to measure the success and the impact of the family housing renovation projects? And my second project is a little broader, goes to prioritization. Among the 45 projects that are supported by the $3.9 billion military construction budget, how were the projects prioritized? Were there specific criteria or strategic considerations that influence the selection of these particular initiatives? And are there specific areas where trade-offs were necessary? You can both take.
I'll take housing, he'll take prioritization of project. Congressman, thank you very much for the question. That our housing budget, of course, reflects two parts, if you will. Our continued funding for oversight of the privatized housing providers, which we continue to increase. In the last several years, we've added 150 professionals to our housing offices, most specifically to engage not just in oversight of the providers, but to engage with the tenants so that their needs are being met and addressed. We are also, our budget request for FY25 includes funding for our overseas housing, which of course we own and operate. And we're going to be building 84 new homes in Belgium, 54 in Germany, and 35 in Japan, because we also don't want to forget our soldiers and families overseas who are in need of new or renovated homes. And of course, that's Army's primary responsibility.
How are you going to measure the success?
We do have tenant satisfaction surveys for our privatized housing. We take those very seriously. We are also, the tenants have a lot of rights now, and we'll know if we're engaging with them much more frequently. And I think success will mean that they're happy and they're satisfied. And we won't stop until they are.
That'll help retention and recruitment then, huh?
Yes.
Sir?
Yes, Congressman, to answer your second question on how do we basically prioritize our requirements. So every requirement comes from the field. All of our units, our ACOMs, our Army commands, submit their requirements based on their priorities through to our installation management command, which controls all of our facility investments. And so that document is it's extremely large, but it's got all the requirements from every organization in the Army. And those requirements are then fed into the Department of the Army. And so we take those requirements. There is a sort of an analytic process where we put those requirements in, and then it will deliver basically what the priorities are based off the different categories of how we prioritize our units. For instance, our fourth generation units probably rate a little higher than some of our training units, and it's just because it's that way, and we want to make sure that our mission is to fight and win our nation's war. So once those requirements are done and we have a fairly concise facility investment plan, which has everything in it, then we have to put the human in the loop, and that's where we have the opportunity to be able to brief our Army senior leaders on what the list looks like, and then we're making trades because we, of course, as you said, there's trade-offs that have to happen because we only have but so much money, and so we're balancing now our MilCon and all our facilities with different categories. I mean, so what's our operational? What's what's our basic housing and those categories, and we're making trades based on what the Army senior leaders choose to make as a priority. For instance, as an example, now you hear the message, we're really prioritizing and investing in barracks. That's absolutely proven through now the outputs of what our facility investment plan is doing for us based on the Army senior leaders, their guidance and their priorities. So,
Thank you, sir. I think my time has expired, but
Ms. Bice?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for you both being here this afternoon. I am a proud part of the Oklahoma delegation and representing the Oklahoma National Guard in Oklahoma City, which is within my district, but also Fort Sill and McAllister Army Ammunition Plant within my colleagues' districts. First, I want to thank you for putting the Shawnee National Guard Readiness Center complex into the budget this fiscal year. It is an important project in my district to replace the current armory that dates back to the 1950s and is in very poor condition. So I appreciate you paying attention to that. I'm also glad to see the planned construction of an additional ammunition demolition facility at the McAllister Army Depot, which currently uses World War II era infrastructure, but it is also the largest employer in McAllister with over 2,000 employees. Looking through the budget, I noticed there are several projects that will be, quote, fully electrified, incorporating on-site renewable energy sources and battery storage. And within the department, there's been a recent announcement that you'll be using solar panels on the Pentagon. So my question is, you all, I'm sure, are very aware that China controls the vast majority of the solar panel market because nearly 45% there's a 45% reduction in cost from panels that are produced here in the U.S. But what I want to make sure is we need to have a secure supply chain, and that's an extremely important piece of this. Secretary Jacobson, will solar panels be used in any of the Army's construction projects that are listed in the budget this year?
Congresswoman, first of all, thank you for your appreciation for our investment, particularly in the organic industrial base. That's part of a multi-year effort to modernize our organic industrial base, and so we look forward to working with you on that. I can't say for sure whether solar panels will be on any of those facilities, but what I can tell you is that our national security is absolutely paramount, and we comply with the Buy American Act, which does allow some exemptions in certain instances, so it's by law. Where procurement is not otherwise feasible or cost-effective. However, we always make sure that we have full integrity of our systems so that any components that are not sourced in the U.S. because of unavailability or because they're cost prohibitive are not operationally vulnerable, so that we're not ever compromising readiness. We also have...
Have you granted any exemptions?
I personally have not, but the Army has been using solar panels in construction now for, it wouldn't be an exemption, the exemption wouldn't come from our office. It would come through the construction process itself. And the Army has been using solar panels since the late 1980s and has constructed many facilities with solar panels, and we've also installed solar arrays. But we are very, very cognizant, and much more so now, to try to source all materials we can domestically and to make sure that when components are not sourced in the U.S., that we ensure, along with the vendors, that they are free from any nefarious interference.
Well, just for the record, I think it's probably wise to mention that there are construction projects at Letterkenny Army Depot in Pennsylvania, the Red River Army Depot in Texas, Joint Base Lewis McChord in Washington, and Ansbach, Germany. And I would be curious if you could let us know if there are potential solar projects that are being, or panels that are being considered for utilization in those areas. This is an issue, and I am concerned that we are looking at the purchase of these solar panels not necessarily for cost-effective reasons, but maybe other initiatives, and I worry about that, and I also worry about the cost increases of these. I think that we've seen not only the rare earth minerals that are in these solar panels being procured from our adversaries across the world, but also when we're talking about battery-powered, whether it's battery-powered vehicles or otherwise, the minerals that go into these solar panels and these batteries are not being mined in countries that we have good relationships with, nor should we be relying on. And I want to make sure that every consideration is being made by the Army to ensure that this is being considered when you are building these particular facilities.
We share your concern, and we are simultaneously addressing, along with the rest of the federal government, and frankly, industry-wide, this problem of the need to source materials in the U.S., the need to refine the materials in the U.S.
Well, with all due respect, Madam Secretary, I think the challenge is that we have put the cart before the horse, and we are pushing these initiatives of electrification before having a robust conversation about supply chains and making sure that we're protecting ourselves from the challenges that we face with our adversaries. That's probably a longer conversation than we have time for at this time, but Mr. Chairman, I appreciate you indulging me, and with that, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to the witnesses for being here. I was really happy to see in your budget the construction of Nevada's first certified small arms range at the Hawthorne Army Depot. This facility will ensure that service members in Nevada will receive the training and maintain their readiness without having to go out of state. So we're very happy about that. Thank you. But I also want to focus on something that has become a more pressing issue. And it's being critical that we provide facilities that are designed to limit exposure to unnecessary risks. I was shocked to learn in 2023, during just the first 3 months, nearly 50,000 service members had to undergo treatment for traumatic brain injuries. The worst part is that we know too many of these are from blast overpressure exposure during routine weapons training. Madam Secretary, are you aware of the efforts across the Department of Defense, specifically in the Army, to address these concerns, and to what extent are you involved in those conversations?
Thank you, Congresswoman Lee. We are very, very focused on how to address the blast overpressure issue and to maintain the health of our soldiers, and to prevent any of these sorts of adverse health effects and conditions, and especially when it's during routine weapons training. We really need to avoid that. And there's a lot of focus right now on preventative efforts and modifying existing tactics. In addition to current efforts for hazard communication, which is important in training, neurocognitive assessment so that we have real-time understanding of what's happening with our soldiers in reaction to these events, wearable sensor development, protective equipment, and training. We also need to evaluate our range and facility designs to develop engineering solutions and modifications to reduce the exposure. And Lieutenant General Vereen may have more to say on that.
I think what Honorable Jacobson kind of described as we continue to improve and modify so that we don't put our soldiers at risk when you're looking at some of the impacts of noise and what we do on our ranges with regards to their mental well-being. So I think we can continue to further evolve and make modifications moving forward.
Yeah, I read in an Army Research Lab study that recommended the use of prepared firing positions with blast-absorbing materials. From an infrastructure perspective, are there other modifications to ranges or shoot houses? Where are we on that process, and what can we do to jumpstart or fast-track this? I mean, we know that our service members are being injured while training as today. So what is it, how can we be helpful to help jumpstart this modifications?
Congresswoman Lee, there's the discussions around how to address blast overpressure are occurring service-wide, and with the Office of Secretary of Defense sort of is taking the lead. But Army has a big role to play here, a very big role to play to help influence that process. And we'd be happy to take for the record more specifics about what we're looking at for future design and engineering and other ways to prevent this sort of exposure, and also to advise Congress, not that we would advise Congress, to inform Congress of where legislation might be helpful.
Okay, yeah, again, I want to make sure that we can talk about training techniques, et cetera, but really there are some modifications we can make infrastructure-wise, and I'd like to see some focus put on that as well. I'm going to turn to geothermal energy. America's first geothermal plant officially went online in Nevada. Today, it's actively producing energy for cloud operations in Vegas and data centers around our states. And I'm really happy to see that the Army and Defense Department are more broadly investing in next-generation geothermal technologies, including a project at the Fallon Naval Air Station in Nevada. So I just wanted to ask, can you share with the committee a little bit more about this initiative and how investment in alternative energy sources contributes to the Army's mission and our national security?
Sure, absolutely. And I really do thank you for that question. Our goal is to make sure we diversify our energy sources from wherever we can. And geothermal is particularly attractive because it's on-site and has so many potential benefits. And so we're engaged in a few research projects right now. The Environmental Security Technology Certification Program, otherwise known as ESTCP, which funds innovative research, has given a grant to Sage Geosystems in partnership with University of Texas, actually, to conduct a geothermal exploration feasibility study at Fort Bliss. So we're really excited about that. We're also engaged in a geothermal feasibility study at Fort Wainwright in Alaska, because that's a place where we're particularly challenged with respect to having many energy options available to us and where the need is really great. Right now at Fort Wainwright in Alaska, we've got the oldest, still serving, still operating coal-fired power plant in the U.S., and it's really old. It's decades beyond when it should still be operating. And so we're planning for the future, a gas-fired power plant there, but we also are, even that is a challenge because of the need to move the gas hundreds of miles to the facility. So we are exploring geothermal there as well.
Great, thank you, Mr. Chair, for me.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank the Secretary and General for being here, and General, thank you for your service as well. Madam Secretary, the Florida National Guard is suffering from some inflation, as the rest of the country is. And it's had a significant impact on some of their MILCON needs, particularly at the Gainesville Readiness Center. They are now unable to complete the original barracks there. They are $18 million short because of inflation over the construction time. Can you tell me how are we prioritizing our MILCON dollars to these previously scheduled and started programs, construction programs that haven't been completed yet?
I'll start and turn to Lieutenant General Vereen if he has, probably does have something to add to that. That's a very important question, Congressman, because particularly in the last few years, where the cost of construction and labor rose considerably and in pretty much unpredictable fashion, we really came in with a lot of cost to complete requests and so forth. And I will look specifically at the Gainesville Readiness Center Barracks situation and report back to you on that. But what we're doing now is with every MILCON project, we are really, first of all, making sure that we have the 35% design truly completed. And also we're working with the Army Corps to scrub those numbers and to get as close to realistic total construction numbers as possible, factoring in these considerations. Because it's an untenable situation to plan in a project, then that falls 18 million short. The requirement is still there, the need is still there,
Right.
and then we have to go back for reprogramming or second tranche, and that's just not ideal.
General Vereen?
Appreciate that.
Yes, Congressman, I will just reiterate kind of what Honorable Jacobson said. And one is we try to create parity as well. And that's important for the Army. We understand that our Compo 2 and Compo 3 soldiers are absolutely vital to the readiness of the Army. We couldn't do it without them as well. And understanding the importance of their facilities, we want to make sure that we do the investments in proper manner. But it does cause us to have to go back and reprogram in some cases. And when we do that, then something else doesn't get funded.
General, could you provide this committee with a list of those reprograms that we're going to have to do, so that we can help you get the funding that you need?
Yeah, Congressman, we
to
can.
complete these programs.
Yes.
If you can get that to us.
Yes, we can.
That'd be great. And I want to congratulate both of you on the Fort Bliss kind of pilot program out there. I know the first, when I read this, I was like, you got to be kidding me. It's a 3D barracks, a 3D printed barracks. I'm like, can that really be true? But I understand the first one is complete, and there's 3 more that are coming online, I think, this summer. Is that correct so far? Is the article I saw correct?
Thank you. We are excited about getting that 3D barracks online. It's not quite online yet. I think they're still doing some seismic testing on it because we haven't, built this barracks with this processing before. But we're excited by the possibility because it cuts a lot of time and cost.
Yeah, that was going to be my follow-up. Once it is complete, to look at the savings on the construction, the maintenance, the daily operations, and then also the fact that you're building with material that's mold resistant. I was shocked. In a 5,700 square foot barracks, that's a big building. So,
Yes, Congressman, no, you're absolutely correct. I think it's important for us to, make sure that as this thing comes online and we actually occupy it, then of course we're all looking at it because we want to ensure that it's going to give us the longevity of what a facility should give us, and then we'll use that to be able to, okay, how do we evolve and how do we continue to look at 3D printing as an option, for construction. I think it's a viable opportunity for not only the Army, but I think for all the other services as well.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I see my time's used up, and I'll yield back.
Dale.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to both of you for taking some time today. California and large states like Florida, Texas, New York have more facilities to manage and respond to more disasters than most other states. Yet they receive the same number of construction projects as smaller states with fewer disasters. Because of this, many of the Army National Guard facilities in larger states are significantly behind the curve in construction, modernization, and maintenance. What is the Army doing to address this significant MILCON needs of the facilities in these larger states? I think this question from Ms. Jacobson, if you don't mind starting on that one, and if Lieutenant General wants to answer, I'll give you the opportunity as well. I know politically this is a complicated one, but it has to be addressed at some point.
It certainly does, Congressman, and we request as we build our budget, we work closely with the Guard and Reserves to make sure needs are addressed and that they present to us projects that can be included in our budget request. And we do have several, both Guard and Reserve projects in our FY25 and going forward. There are several projects, but I appreciate your concern that particularly states where where most of our presence is in the form of Guard and Reserve centers, that we should pay more attention to those places, and we have every intention of doing so.
Congressman, thank you for the question as well. I think what's important for how we do, I kind of talked about the facility investment plan and how the Army does it. We have separated both the National Guard and Reserves requirements to ensure that they don't get absorbed in what the active requirements are because they're extremely large. That way we can turn to ensure that we have parity when we're looking across all of our investments so they're not embedded in a long laundry list of just Army requirements. They're highlighted because they're on a separate investment list. So I think we've evolved over time, but of course it's really to create parity. And are we as good as we should be? Probably not. We can improve, but we also know the importance of those Compo 2 and Compo 3 units as well to what the Army does. So,
did you have a follow-up on this, Ms. Jacobson, or should I hit my next question?
Well, no, I just somehow magically pulled out the
Magically?
No, believe me, a stack of paper to find this thing just like that within your 5 minutes is pretty good. No, it's we've requested for the National Guard in our FY25 MILCON request $362.1 million. So it's, I can be more. I could get you a more specific readiness centers, vehicle maintenance centers. Some of that's going to go to planning and design and ranges and training facilities. It's a combination.
All right, well, I appreciate that. And this question, different question. And I've brought this up in a few different hearings with different agencies or different branches, but during our quality of life hearing, I flagged a concern that a local community hospital which supports nearby service members recently announced that they would be suspending their labor and delivery services due to unprecedented financial challenges. This loss in care means our service members will need to drive almost 2 hours to the next closest labor and delivery unit, which places an incredible hardship on our service members and their families. While this particular case involves a Navy base, I'm concerned that the Defense Health Agency moves forward with their plan to consolidate on-base hospitals and clinics in coming years. Many of our bases will not be able to rely on community care to provide a level of health care our service members deserve, especially in rural communities. Is this an issue you are tracking, and what steps is the Army taking to ensure essential health care services are ready available for our service members?
Congressman, thanks for the question. Not necessarily tracking that particular incident. I do know that there are a lot of discussions with regards to healthcare. Working with DHA and their transformation of DHA and in some cases how the services will be providing their medical experts to support the DHA new reform. And that's concerning for the Army as well. That I know of today, there is no movement to I think, reduce any of our Army hospitals. And I think from the most part, we have the capacity to be able to do most of the care required on our Army hospitals. As a matter of fact, I think a lot of our Air Force service members and their families are utilizing Army facilities when it comes to the medical facilities. So I think we're okay. And right now, as I know, there's no movement to reduce our capacity or our capability.
Well, I appreciate that. I was mostly just bringing it up to raise awareness on this issue. So thank you, and I yield back, Chairman.
Mr. Gonzalez.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Secretary and General, for testifying today. It is my understanding that President Biden is going to allow displaced Palestinians from the Israel-Hamas war into the U.S. It's my absolute honor and privilege to serve the people of Fort Bliss as well as parts of JBSA San Antonio. Will Fort Bliss be used will Fort Bliss be used to house these folks from Palestine?
I have no familiarity with that issue.
I raise that because, as my colleague, Mr. Rutherford, mentioned on the 3D printing, Fort Bliss is the Swiss Army knife of the Army, right? When Afghan refugees were looking for a place, guess where they went? It was Fort Bliss. When the border crisis boiled up to a point where there was no place to put them, guess what they used? Fort Bliss. And it seems as if every time there's a crisis of some sort or another, Fort Bliss is at the top of the list. And I'm okay with that. I mean, the people of El Paso are very warm and welcoming, but here's the deal. We house and we deal with this crisis, and then we don't get reimbursed for the issues, right? I'm still dealing with some of the funding from the Afghan resettlement, if you will. So I bring this up to you. This is a very serious issue, and not only is it going to cause a monetarily setback, if you will, or extra cost to Fort Bliss, there's also a political elements to this as well. So I would ask if there is something that is going to happen, would you please contact my office so we can be made aware of it? My next question is on family separation allowance. At what point is the Army going to increase family separation allowance to $400?
Congressman, I'll have to take that for the record. I have no timeline, and I'm kind of unaware of.
Currently, family separation allowance is $250. Last year, Congress passed in the NDA to raise it to $400 at the discretion of the services. And so we talk about taking care of Army sailors, soldiers, sailors, Army, and Marines, but we don't act on it, right? So I'm asking, and there's airmen thrown in there too somewhere. I'm asking every service, when are these families going to get their money? And I think it's an important one to act. The next question, man, I'm firing fastballs today. My next question is on JBSA. JBSA is very important. Fort Sam is very important to San Antonio, and it seems as if Fort Sam is the long-lost, forgotten child that nobody wants to take care of. It's not even in my district, but there are people that are impacted by that in so many different ways. So am I reading this correct? There is no Army MILCON for JBSA in the years of 25 through 29 in the fight-up?
So for JBSA, that's a joint base, and the Army's not the land holding agency for it, it's the Air Force. As far as I know, I do know there's a MILCON project for some of the training barracks that's there. I think the Air Force is the first one in for a construction of a new barracks that's in the medical training complex. But as far as I know, that's the only facility I know that's in the short list for construction. But again, the Navy handles that because they're the lead agency for JBS.
So I know METSI, and I know part of that is I think you're gonna price it out. But once again, in this joint base environment, what I see is everyone is saying somebody else is going to take care of it, and nobody takes care of it. And I'm trying to go, okay, who is going to take care of it, so that way I can go and help advocate to allocate funds to take care of this. And I will tell you this: out of the JBSA process, I feel as if Fort Sam Houston is the last to eat, man. Right? There's nobody advocating for them, and you're not asking for any dollars in here for that. So, you know, if I'm the Air Force or some of these other services, I'm going, well, the Army isn't asking for anything. Then guess what? You're not going to get anything. So I just worry about the direction that Fort Sam Houston is heading. I've been there many times. It's fallen further and further behind. And once again, nobody, it seems as if nobody's advocating for it. And I'd like to. We can't select a program. We can't select a project if you don't submit a project. And you're telling me no projects in 4 years? I mean, it just doesn't make any sense to me. So with that, Chairman, I'm out of time, and I will yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And to our witnesses, thank both of you for being here. I also want to thank you for your commitment to improving the quality of life for our servicemen and women. Your submitted documents go into great detail about housing, childcare, the 5-year plan, Madam Secretary, that you mentioned, the restoration, maintenance, replacement. And so thank you all for focusing on taking care of those men and women who take care of us. I want to talk about a couple of Mississippi-specific issues very quickly. In FY23 in the NDAA, the Secretary of the Army was, and it was in Section 2845, talks about the land conveyance of an abandoned armory there and 5 acres located in the city of Starkville on Highway 12. There is, of course, a process in which there would be restitution cost paid to the Army for the conveyance of that property. But since that was included back in December of 23, that conveyance still has not yet taken place. We routinely get calls from some of our constituents in that area asking us to help determine a timeline. And I know you don't have that information here in front of you. I don't expect you to be able to give me a timeline as to when that will be able to take place. But I would ask that y'all continue to be in contact with our office about the process, if possible, a potential data as to when we could look at that conveyance being able to take place. We appreciate and look forward to working with you on that to make sure that that is carried out in a timely fashion. Also want to talk about at Meridian Naval Air Station, Key Field in Meridian, which is an aviation support facility. They have there the Chinook platforms that they fly from that facility. In the recently passed FY24 budget, there was money placed in there for the planning and design for a hangar facility. These platforms sit out there open and exposed on the runway, being exposed to the elements. And so this is something I know that our National Guard in Mississippi has been seeking to try to move forward. That funding was secured in the FY24. And so my question is what is the general time frame for something? And again, we're talking about not construction, but just planning and design for a facility such as that. Would this be something that you would be looking at 12 to 18 months? Is this, and again, just in the planning, can y'all give me a rough time frame as to now that those funds have been allocated, when we could expect maybe to see the planning and design work begin?
Well, the goal when planning and design money is appropriated for a specific project, typically that takes place immediately, because the goal is obviously to move forward with the project itself. I don't know the specifics of the status of the planning and design for the hangar facility. I would hope that it is fairly routine, that there's nothing so unique about it that should take too long, but we'd be happy to check unless you know.
No, I don't, but I would, having a look at most of our projects, most of our P&D is about 12 to 18 months P&D time, and then everything else comes on the back end.
Yes, and again, I was just asking in a general time frame. I wasn't asking specifically, just so that if I have an idea as to when to kind of be benchmarking this and looking, and so that if there need to be follow up. So thank y'all for that. And the last question, are really just more of a statement, just for your situational awareness. I know this is not going to be a decision that you will make, but our National Guard has applied for a state partnership with Sweden. Currently, they have partnerships with Uzbekistan and Bolivia. They are seeking to move into the NATO space. Very important, I believe, in light of what we're seeing going on in the European theater. And so just wanted to make y'all aware of that. Again, I know that decision will not come down from you specifically, but anything that you can do to see if we could expedite a decision on that request would be greatly appreciated. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Ms. Wasserman Schultz has requested the second round. I'm going to yield my time to her and let her, and we'll finish up.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it, Mr. Chairman. I want to focus on child development centers. The Army's asked for 3 new CDCs in Fort Meade, Fort Liberty, and in Germany. Can you briefly tell me what's the Army's current backlog of children waiting to get into a CDC, and how many more CDCs are necessary in addition to these 3 centers to address the backlog?
Okay, I can take that one. And I appreciate the question, Ranking Member Wasserman Schultz. So we are, so right now, the current backlog is roughly 130 days. And I say that, but it varies across our installations and where they are. Most of our larger installations probably have the largest backlog. And then our category of
130 days Army-wide?
Army-wide on average. But again, we have some installations that are 30 days or less, and then we have some that are closer to the far end, 120, 130 days on average. So, but I say that because most of our category of childcare, where we really are finding that we don't have the staffing, is really in our newborns to 5-year-old. It's the very young kids that we really are strapped for the staff to be able to actually care for them. I would say that now we are in a really good position when we look at the amount of infrastructure we have for childcare CDCs across the Army. That's probably not the limiting factor anymore.
Right.
Yes, we do have to repair some of the ones that we currently have that are down for various reasons, but I think we have the amount of facilities. Now it's just trying to get the workforce in.
So what are you doing to address the workforce issue? Other branches of the service have been able to work with spouses and making sure that they can get certifications and kind of.
So we are absolutely probably in step with the other services, and there's some things that we're doing a little bit different. I just would highlight. We're all in this fight for talent, and we're doing the same things. And so I think when we look at salary and incentives and tuition assistance and things of that nature, those have been really beneficial. But the things that are really turning the needle for us is really the offset for childcare. When you have employees who have kids that are childcare age, then of course we either give free childcare or we give it at a reduced rate. And so that's been a great program that's turned the needle for us. The second thing is our access to to our commissaries. We have a lot of our workers that have no DoD affiliation, so they're working on our installations, but they don't have CAT car access and are not dependents. But we have opened it up 17 of our installations where we allow our CDC workers who are not affiliated to the military to be able to shop at the commissaries, which is a huge motivator for them.
Okay.
And so
Sorry, I'm running out of time, and I wanted to actually ask you about Camp Bill Simons.
Oh, okay.
And I appreciate
Yes,
the update, but I don't want to lose the opportunity. So I'm concerned about the problem that is going on with access to childcare at Camp Bill Simons. At the recent Air Force budget hearing, Assistant Secretary Chowdhury shared that the issue has been raised to the level of the Air Force and Army secretaries. My understanding is there's a CDC that's planned for FY26 to provide a permanent solution for Camp Bill Simons families, and there are interim steps being taken, including expanded at-home care and renovating the Eglin CDC. Secretary Jacobson, do you have an update to the status of the Child Development Center for Camp Bill Simons? When is a final decision going to be made to address the child care shortage? And what communications has the Army had with the Camp Bill Simons families to explain the decision-making process for a CDC for Camp Bill Simon families?
Ranking Member Wasserman Schultz, I'm sorry I don't have any news since Assistant Secretary Chowdhury reported during his hearing a couple of weeks ago. I'd say that based on the safety analysis, risk analysis that was conducted by the OSD organization that conducts such analyses, that it is highly unlikely that a green light will be given to build the CDC on Camp Bill Simons. So the question is, what is the alternative location for a CDC and when? And
right, and the main question is, how are we going to get those families to not be in a position where they're driving an hour each way in order to be able to get their children access to quality childcare and also be able to have access to a quality of life that makes sense for them?
correct. The secretaries of both the Air Force and Navy have been engaged on the issue and are working through an agreement that will address the issues about interim childcare and then longer-term childcare for 7th Special Forces Group. However, I will say that in the last couple of years, since this issue has been brought to our attention, we have made a lot of arrangements, alternative arrangements offered to those families, and we will continue to do so. But I'm sorry to say that the issue is not resolved.
But have you been taking into consideration and getting input and feedback from the families instead of just preparing to impose a decision on them?
I personally met with the families. It's been over a year now, and I'm hear stories back through their representatives about the concerns. So
That's a long answer. It's a yes or no question. Have you been taking into consideration their needs and communicating with them in order to make sure that a resolution works for these families?
It's my understanding that the both secretaries have representatives who have met with the families.
Okay, that's not really my understanding, so we need to make sure that we clear up. There's not been a lot of, I'm asking because there has been insufficient communication.
Understood.
And I'm feeling like from 2 hearings now, asking both people in the same position that you hold, I'm not getting a straightforward answer as to whether or not there's been recent direct communication and coordination with these families on the permanent solution and the interim solutions for their families that alleviate the really unacceptable problem that has been created.
Understood.
So if you could correct that and make sure and come back to me and tell me when and how that communication is taking place. Because I know there's decisions being made, and I know what some of those decisions are, and those decisions, as far as I know, have not been communicated or coordinated with the families. Thank you.
Understood.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Bishop, do you have anything else? Okay. Finally, a couple of comments by me on the issue of childcare. I spent 21 years on the bench, and I tried an awful lot of sexual assault child cases. And an awful lot of those people that have that problem, the ones that I got ended up in jail. But the ones that we didn't find, they like to be around things like child care centers. That was one of their, that was a constant. I put in place in Texas a provision where you could go and where, in fact, I think it's at a federal level now, where you can check and see if there's any indication of any prospective employee being from someplace else that has moved in there seeking basically that same kind of contact that we're trying to avoid. So nothing is more important than making sure the people that have that problem don't get into our child care system. I'm not going to go into what the problem is, but you know what it is. And we want to be very cautious because these are our treasures of our soldiers, and we don't want them to ever have to worry that their child's not safe. It takes a little extra effort as you're interviewing people, but that effort will pay great dividends if you catch somebody that's trying to get in there.
Chairman Carter, yes, it's not only just an interview. I think we have really strict processes in place where we vet every single employee through background checks, and we run extensive law enforcement checks on every single employee to ensure that we don't have anybody that has really entered our space when it comes to our CDCs, and we also have continuous vetting, meaning that we're constantly reviewing individuals' names to ensure that they're not committing crimes and they're going unknown. So
one of the, just for your information, one of the ones that I convicted and sent to prison, he got out after he had a pretty good sentence, but he got out. But I was still on the bench when he got out. He didn't come back to Texas. He went to Colorado. And there was no way at that time Colorado could find out about the Texas conviction. So I fixed that. And there's a way to do that. And if I can help, I'll be glad to help you. Because these folks travel all over the country. And they truly do. And that's an evil we need to keep away from our children. That's one thing I want to say. And secondly, on contracting, two things. First, on the 3D printing, they're going to need another form of contract because the standard contract is it's just not what they do. Everything else is usually cement blocks and stuff. So they need to have a different form of contract. And there's a dozen people do this. I'm not talking for one particular company. There's a dozen people now doing this 3D printing. And any of them or all of them would be glad to sit down with people to show what they need in the way of a contract. Not that they would automatically be selected, but so they can compete against the regular contract. Because the standard contract you have now makes it hard for them to do anything but be a demonstration project. And so keep that in mind. And then I used to do Section 8 housing projects. And if we did them with bond financing, we withheld money for repairs. And that was their money. And they got it in pieces. Because the bondholders wanted to make sure that what they were investing in wasn't going to be trashed up before it's even any worth to it. And the easiest way to do that is tell them, okay, no money, and we're gonna check every year, and if you kept up with your maintenance, we'll give you X amount of dollars back. They don't like it, but that's one way you can get it done. Maybe you're thinking about that. I don't know. But I drafted a lot of those contracts back when I was doing that, and so did some other lawyers, so I know a little bit about that. Thank you very much for what you do. I appreciate both of you very much. And my door's open to you at all times. You both know that. We'll work together and get this thing done, and we're going to crank it out by 1st of June. This bill will be out by the 1st of June. With that, recess.